Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast couldn't be possible without the support of Career Minds. More about Career Minds after the show. Today, I am just so excited to bring you Sacha Connor. I met Sacha years ago after she launched her company, the Virtual Work Insider. Sacha spent most of her career at Clorox in marketing and brand management, where she pioneered the idea of virtual work. She is a true innovative and a trendsetter as it relates to the idea of virtual work. And she's also a self-proclaimed meeting wizard, which, quite frankly, I'm excited just to hear a little bit more about that. Sacha has such a unique clocking out story that, from my perspective, is incredibly inspiring. So I can't wait to share her journey, and we have a little fun along the way towards the end. So without further ado, please enjoy Sacha Connor and her clocking out story. Sacha, good morning. It's so good to see you. Welcome to the Clocking Out Podcast.
Hi, Raymond. Thanks for having me.
Well, so first of all, I am just elated to jump into your background. You have such an amazing story. And, when I look back at your career, there's so many parallels. The only difference is I worked in HR, you were in marketing. But when I think about when you launched your business and when I launched my business, there's so many parallels on the work that we do. And I'm just incredibly excited to dig into your story. But first, I must ask, where did Sacha come from? And I was thinking, was it your mom? Was it your dad? And I said, you know what? I'm going to hold it for our conversation this morning. How did you get your name?
Oh, how did I get my name? My parents found it in a book that they were looking at, in the 70s, and it's spelled Sacha, which is the French spelling, which confuses everyone. And so they liked it because it was unique, right? So this was before, Obama's daughter, Sacha, before Beyonce was Sasha Fierce, right? So I grew up being, the only Sacha in my school. And oftentimes people ask me if I have Russian heritage because Sacha could be a nickname for, Alexander, Alexandra. So it confuses everyone to have the C in the name.
Yeah, I love that. And I did some research on your name. And when you and I first met, I made the mistake of putting Sacha. And obviously I corrected myself there. But when I did some research on your name, one of the things that I found, popping up over and over again was fighting spirit. And there was also defending warrior. And then I saw fighting spirit. And you're right. I did see a lot of connection to Russian and Ukrainian. So I thought that was really interesting. But this fighting spirit really resonated with me because, you're an entrepreneur. And I just wonder, in terms of your family and siblings, tell me about your family structure. Where did you grow up and how many siblings and about your parents, and we'll go from there.
So I grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, so right near where I live right now. And I grew up with my mom and my dad in the household. And then I'm the oldest of three kids. So I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me, and I have a brother who is 6 years younger than me.
So I'm curious, what was the household like as you being the oldest in terms of, did you get along with your siblings? What was that like?
My sister and I shared a room. And so when I was little, I had a lot of separation anxiety. And so one of the ways that my parents tried to solve for that was once my sister was born, they stuck us in a room together, which I think was great at first because I had this companion. And then as you get older, as you're in high school together, you're sharing a room, sharing a closet. So I think there was a fair amount of fights over space. But one of the things that my sister and I used to love to do is we had our beds facing each other, and we'd throw a ball back and forth to each other and talk at night, and until somebody fell asleep. And then my brother, being 6 years younger than us, the poor kid had to deal with like us dressing him up in all sorts of outfits, making him play along with us. We we're constantly playing, teacher with him and our stuffed
Mm.
animals. And the other big thing about my family is that we were a big sports family. So we all played different sports. My parents were really hands-on and loved to coach. Part of the reason that they got into coaching was because of my separation anxiety, and that when they would take, because I'm the oldest, when they would take me to, soccer or softball, that I would like not let go of my mom or my dad's leg and be like, don't leave me here. And so they're like, I guess I'm coaching.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I can't help but think that there's some connection to the work that you do with that. And it's really interesting how you must have overcome that at some point, but we're not going to jump into that just yet. I'm really curious, like when you were at a young age, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a teacher at first. I loved the idea of like being in front of the chalkboard and teaching what I knew. And both of my parents, actually, their first careers were as teachers as well. So I think that that was just kind of an innate part of what I thought about in terms of a career. And then obviously, I love school. And so I think, just having those teachers as role models when I was a kid as well made me consider teaching.
So did you, so with your younger brother and sister, were you like the oldest that would sit in the room and like set up a class and like pretend that your younger siblings were your students and you'd get up there and you'd play teacher role?
All the time, all the time. And it's funny, I would see that even with my own kids these days when they were younger. My daughter would do that, especially. Like I would come up to her room at night and she would have like all of her stuffed animals on the bed, and she'd be teaching whatever she learned at school that day. And so I don't know whether it's nature or nurture, but like she was repeating a lot of the same things I used to do.
That's funny. So I have a younger brother that's 2.5 years younger than me. And I used to watch Rocky movies and, movies like that. And I would always, be like, we're going to box. And I would always end up like wrestling him or boxing him. A little bit different in my household, but I love that you were at such a young age tapping into, like that teaching interest and really being kind of like that figure, that teacher figure to your siblings. And so, what was it that? So you wanted to be a teacher, and I'm curious, thinking about where you went to school and what did you end up deciding to do?
Well, both of my parents, having been teachers, said yes, it's a noble profession, but you're not going to make much money.
Mm,
So get into something that's a little bit more practical, that you'll be set up for success coming out of school. And so I went to Lehigh University and I started in the arts and sciences program, thinking maybe journalism, because I really love to write. I love to read. I love to write. And then I spent the first year in the arts and sciences school and then started to think about moving into business. So I did
mm.
transfer into the business school at Lehigh and started taking marketing courses there and realized, wow, this gets my creative juices flowing. Like I really enjoy the marketing classes that I'm taking, and started to then think about a career in possibly brand management or advertising.
So when you went to Lehigh, which is in kind of like Eastern Pennsylvania ish, you didn't really know what you wanted to do. You kind of went into school, enrolled, but sort of kept an open mind in terms of where you would evolve. I love that. So what was um, I guess, when was the point where you realized that arts and sciences was going to lead to business? Was it halfway through your school year? When was that?
I think it was toward the end of the first year. I was taking a technical writing class, and I remember my parents being like, "Oh, technical writing, that sounds really pragmatic," that. And I was
Right.
like, "It was pretty boring." I was
Mm.
like, "Yes, I think I could do it, but it's not. It's a little dry for me." And I think that that's when I started to kind of think about the marketing piece, because there is kind of a writing component to it and also this creativity component to it, and thinking that even like the breadth of courses that the business school offered sounded a lot more interesting to me than what I was seeing in arts and sciences.
Mm. So what was your first job out of school? What did that look like?
So to even back up before I got the first job, what I wanted my first job to be was in brand management. I wanted to work for Procter and Gamble. I wanted to, get straight into that world. And back so this was, I graduated from Lehigh in 2000. And back then it was very hard to get a brand management job straight out of undergrad. You had to usually have a master's degree. And what I went through, so I was able to get an interview at Procter and Gamble. So I had an interview, and then they had me do like a timed test around analytics. And I must have bombed that test. I remember sitting in the career services office at Lehigh and looking at this test and being like, I have no idea what they're asking me to do here. I felt like the interview had gone pretty well, but I did not feel prepared for that test. So needless to say, nothing moved forward with Procter and Gamble. And so what I realized was, I needed to think about what's the next kind of gateway to maybe get me to that brand management job, or give me a first step out of undergrad, and then determine if I wanted to go on for an MBA. And advertising seemed like the best fit for that. So my first job in advertising was with a small ad agency here in the Philly suburbs called Baki Communications. And it turned into be a really great experience. It was a small agency, so I got to have my hands in everything. I was in account services. So I got to work with different clients. I got to work really closely with the creative team, the PR group. I just was a sponge. I was just soaking it up. And, I was there for a couple of years. And then that led to a much more prominent advertising job at Goodby Silverstein and Partners in San Francisco.
So when I was thinking about this idea of fighting spirit, I keep having to go back to that, because it sounds like you had this desire to want to be in brand management. Things didn't work out, but you had the tenacity to just keep going. You were open to opportunities, but you wanted to stay in this field. And so I have to commend the fact that you kept working at it. And I guess, what is it about your this tenacity to keep fighting and really overcome the challenges that are in front of you?
It's a deep, interesting question to kind of reflect on where that comes from. It's possibly, I feel like my parents were always just like the biggest supporters and in saying like, okay, what do you want to do next? You're totally capable of doing that, and helping to support me to do whatever the thing was that I had set my sights on. And things don't come easy to me. I just work really hard at them. So from a sports perspective, from a work perspective, from a school perspective, quick little anecdote about school. So when I went into the business school, I was taking economics class, and we had a visiting professor, and he was really more of a researcher than a professor. And so I was assigned to his early morning class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And he would be teaching, and it was a bit of a complex topic for me. It was new to me. And he was having trouble teaching. Like, he was even drawing the supply and demand curves wrong sometimes. And so I was having a really hard time following. And so I would go to his 9 a.m. class, and then I would go to office hours later in the day and ask him for help. And then what I started to realize was that his 9 a.m. class that he was teaching to me, he struggled through it. But by the time he had his 1 or 2 p.m. class, he had hit his stride. So there were some weeks where I would go to the 9 a.m. class, then I'd go to the 1 p.m. class, and then I'd go to office hours. And he'd say to me, "You're going to get an A." And I said, "That's not the point. I want to understand this stuff." Yeah. And so I think that the tenacity is just I'm really curious. I want to do things really well. I feel like my parents always kind of supported me in any of the ideas that I had, kind of in that execution of it. And, it's just something that even today is something that I work on with my own kids is, when they have an idea, I tell my daughter, my favorite thing to hear from her is I have an idea. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm in. How can I help you execute your idea?
I love that. Sacha, I love that so much. I appreciate you sharing that insight there, because I know that through your career, you've had some really tough choices to make, as a professional, as an entrepreneur. And the fact that you recognize at such an early age that going above and beyond, even though your teacher said, Sacha, you have an A, that you really just said, you know what, I'm not settling. I'm going to continue to do the extra work and make that choice to do the extra work, even though it wouldn't have mattered. And so, I think that fighting spirit at such an early age is ringing through. And I love the fact that you're being that support to your kids as well. And can't wait to dig into that a little bit more. And so what's next? So tell me about the next big move, the next step.
Yes. So after I had been at a much more high profile ad agency that was in San Francisco, I'd been there for a couple of years. I realized that I really wanted to get into brand management. And because that was my goal. And I still wanted to try to do it without having an MBA. And what I remembered was that when I graduated from Lehigh, one of my best friends from school, one of her really good friends from high school I had met along the way. And I remember when we graduated, she had told me about how she was about to start working for this company in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she was going to help them sell cat litter. And I remember being like, oh, cat litter? Like, how fun would that be, right? Like, I'm going to go work at this, cool ad agency. She's going to go sell cat litter. Well, you flash forward now, I'm in San Francisco. I'm working in the ad agency. And I'm realizing that cat litter company is actually the Clorox company, which is in Oakland, right across the Bay Bridge. So I called up Monica and I said, hey, are there any jobs over there at Clorox? I'm still really interested in getting into brand management. So she helped to connect me to the right people at the company for an interview. And so again, like I didn't have an MBA, so they had a marketing associate position that was available that I interviewed for. And so I got the job. And I came in to Clorox working as a marketing associate on their food businesses, which is kind of funny, right? Clorox has food businesses, which is Casey Masterpiece barbecue sauce and Hidden Valley Ranch dressing.
Had no idea.
Yes.
That's great. It's funny how these brands that are, they're like a house of brands where you have the name, but they own so many of these other sub brands that, make up their portfolio. So it's pretty funny. Do you happen to own a cat? I'm just curious.
No, and I actually didn't really ever work directly on the cat litter business either, because there's so many businesses. Right. I rotated through many of them. So from, Brita water filters to Pine Sol to Liquid Plumber to those food businesses. But there were a couple businesses that I actually didn't really touch.
Yeah. So we have a cat and I find myself changing the cat litter all the time. So I will be next time thinking about Clorox when I'm changing.
Trash step and scoop away cat litter.
Okay. I will. Let me make a note of that. Perfect. So Sacha, I know, so you're living in San Francisco and you're starting your career at Clorox. And I know just from knowing you, there's an interesting story about how you met your husband. And I wonder if you don't mind taking a moment to share that and how that kind of relates to your journey at Clorox, because it's so relevant and so interesting.
Yes. So I moved to San Francisco and lived with three of my best friends from high school. And so they were all from back here in the Philadelphia area. And one of my friends from high school that I lived with, she was friends with Tim, who's now my husband. She knew him through her older brother. And he lived down the street from us in San Francisco. He was going to law school, and she kept inviting him over all the time. And so he actually went to our high school back in Philadelphia. He was a senior when I was a freshman. So we knew of each other, but we had never actually met. So my friend Alyssa kept inviting him over. And then over time, we got to know each other better and started dating. And so what both of our families, I think, were really excited that we decided to get married. We both had moved all the way to California only to find somebody who was from the same hometown. So, for us, that meant that we had always talked about eventually moving back to the Philadelphia area since we wanted to be closer to family.
So I'm curious, did you end up marrying in California or did you go back to Philadelphia to tie the knot?
We had the wedding here in Philadelphia since everybody was here. Some of our friends from San Francisco flew out for the wedding, but it made more sense to have it where the family was.
Love that. I love that. So you're now married and living in San Francisco with your husband from high school. And so what's next at Clorox?
So I loved my time at Clorox. I was learning so much. I had moved up in the organization within the brand management function without having my MBA. I felt like I was getting my MBA on the job there. I was surrounded by the most intelligent people, creative people. I was working on marketing campaigns. I was doing new product innovation. I was working with sales teams. And I had been there for 8 years when my husband and I had our first child, so my daughter, Nevin, and we wanted her to grow up near her extended family. And I really didn't want to leave my job because I loved it so much. So I asked the bold question of Clorox, which was, could I keep my job but move to the opposite coast of the United States? And this was in 2010. So it was pretty unheard of at the time to have a job like I did. And at the time that was, I was leading new product innovation for their home cleaning division. And it was unheard of to not be at headquarters to have a job like that. But I had a good relationship with the chief marketing officer, and he said, okay, you can be an experiment. Let's see if you can do your job and lead your teams from 3,000 miles and 3 time zones away. So I was super grateful that they were open to trying to retain me as an employee and giving me the freedom to try this out.
Wow. Okay. So I need to unpack that for a second. You said a few things there. You had to be bold and go to your chief marketing officer with this very bold request. And I know that oftentimes people, even when they have a really good relationship with their boss or manager, I think back when I was wanting to leave and start my own company and I had to go to the CHRO and pitch this idea of leaving the company and having them support me through the transition. That fear is a fear that I think so many people live with. And I just wonder what, like they could have said no. And now you've labeled yourself as someone who may end up leaving the company. And I just wonder if there was how did you overcome the stories that maybe you would tell yourself that this is not a good idea and that you really should have that conversation because in your heart, that's what you needed to do. I'm just curious.
So I wanted to approach it not as an ultimatum. I wanted to approach it as an idea and trial balloon it. And I wanted to I also had the support of the group because I had earned some respect. I had shown that I was a valuable member of the organization. So it had already proven that I added value. So I felt like my request to try to experiment with this would be met with at least curiosity, because I felt like I had given a lot already to the organization. So there wasn't trepidation in that this would be looked upon negatively. I think I also knew that there was so much importance for our family to move back to Philadelphia that if they said no and I was going to end up moving anyway and I would just need to find another job. So I didn't think that there was a huge risk. What I did do is, again, instead of it being an ultimatum, was offering up some suggestions because the role that I was in, leading new product innovation, it wasn't a frontline role, meaning I was not leading one of the brands that was already in the market, which I knew that that was the most risky role for them to allow me to move. But I also knew that there was some precedent where there were some of these customer marketing roles where they actually liked the customer marketing lead to be close to the customer. Mm-hmm. So I even like threw out some ideas like, well, what if I worked on the Walmart business? If I'm in Philadelphia, that's closer to Bentonville, Arkansas, or maybe I work on the BJ's business that's in Boston. I could fly up and back from there, right? So giving some optionality to it, which I think allowed them to think about like, okay, there's some options here. And I made the pitch because I really loved my new product innovation job. I made the pitch to say, could we just try me in the new product innovation role for like 6 months or so? And then if that's not working out, maybe we can move to a customer marketing position. And so they agreed to that. And so when I first moved, though, I felt an incredible weight on my shoulders. But like, I gotta prove this out. I gotta prove that this is going to work, not just for my own career, but I knew that if I didn't make it work, they weren't going to let other people actually go remote as well. So there was back to that kind of fighting spirit that we were talking about. Like I was like, I am going to need to fight for this so that I still get the opportunity to work for a company I love, but remotely, and allow and open the door for others.
Sacha, I absolutely love that confidence. That is, that's remarkable. And the fact that you believed in yourself, you worked hard, but you took it a next step, and you really presented options to show a pathway that allowed you to really continue with your career, and so I wonder. So now you're in Philadelphia and you're working in this virtual role. They supported the role. Did your husband go with you? Obviously, he went with you, right?
So
how did that happen?
He went with me and our daughter. We had timed it out so that he had, because he was a lawyer by that point, so that he had to take the Pennsylvania bar as well. So he had passed Pennsylvania bar. He had actually gotten a job in Philadelphia. So we kind of timed it everything together so that when we came back to Philadelphia, that he had a job as a lawyer here when we moved as well. Mm-hmm.
So when I was doing some research, I came across this, I guess, self-proclaimed term, the pioneer of virtual work. So when did you crown yourself as the pioneer of virtual work? At what point? Was that at Clorox or was that fast forwarding? I'm just curious. When did people look at you and say, wow, look at what Sacha's done, and you've created a pathway for others to follow in your footsteps within the company?
Yeah, I would say like the term, I would say I was pioneering virtual work at Clorox. Like I don't love like a title of like, I am this, right? It was just something that I ended up being kind of an entrepreneur at Clorox, where I kind of fell into this in terms of, I had a personal need to move back to Philly. I had a personal desire to stay with the company. And then that turned into me trying to figure out, like, back to like me wanting to, I'm a high achiever, me wanting to problem solve. So that turned into me saying like, okay, like here I am back in Philadelphia in 2010. How am I going to make this work? What am I going to need to learn how to do differently in order to lead my teams, build these businesses when I am far removed in physical distance from the group that I'm working with every day.
Mm-hmm. So I want to just take a moment to just reflect on, there's so many people who are in companies where there's a situation that is whether they're complacent or they're looking for the next thing. What advice would you give employees, people who are in jobs where they're trying to do something different? And in this particular case, it was the family that was a driver for you and getting back to Philadelphia. But I wonder if you have any advice to individuals that are looking to make a change in their career within their company, but they are looking for some inspiration of how to approach what that next thing would look like.
I think there's back to the piece of proving your value first, showing that you are adding to the company business objectives, the company culture, that you are being successful in, working with others in your team. I think that will buy you a lot of goodwill. And then based on the idea that you have, coming with a plan around it, like understanding like what might be the barriers for why someone would say no. And so coming and approaching the person that you're asking for the permission or approval with some ideas, or even saying like, I know that what you might be concerned about is X, Y, and Z, and here's how I would approach it to overcome those concerns. I think what could be a situation where it wouldn't work out is if you are not coming prepared with any of that information and just saying, I want this, right? Because then you're requiring the other person to see the vision, to help you overcome the barriers that they think will pop up within whatever you're proposing. So think about it like as in any sort of business proposal. It's like, what is the goal? How are you going to get there? What's the execution plan? And then making sure that you have some check-ins along the way. So like I said about my situation, I was open to saying, okay, let's revisit this in 6 months or so, right? So it feels again like an experiment versus something that feels really risky to the person to agree to.
Yeah, I think about just career conversations in general where employees will go meet with their manager and they say, okay, I've accomplished this, and this. So what's next? And it's really not up to the manager or your leader to come up with what's next. It's really about, your ability to present, what's next and get the support. So I love that share. So you're at Clorox, you're in this new role, you're working virtually, and that started in 2010. And I know that 2018 is when you launched your company. What was that pitch like? Because I know that you were loving your job. You were loving the work. There wasn't anything real negative that was driving you to want to, dip your toe in entrepreneurship. And I wonder what that next pitch looked like to say, it's time for me to move on from Clorox.
Yes. So a couple things to consider that happened between 2010 and 2018, which was when I first got the approval to move remote to Philadelphia. It did come with some caveats, right? So back to what we were talking about, those barriers. They said, okay, you can be an experiment. Let's see how this goes. But you'll never get promoted to director level or above because those roles are so important. They have to be here at headquarters. You will never get to work in certain roles or certain businesses because those roles are so important. They have to be at headquarters. You will move from a high potential employee to low potential, not because your skills have changed, but what happened was we uncovered that there was distance bias in the people processes. So what we uncovered through this experiment with me moving was like, oh, like promotability is linked to location. And then that means that potential links to location.
Whoa, wait, time out, Sasha.
Yeah,
I have to interject here. So basically you're being treated as a second-class citizen, essentially.
So I was told this. Okay, we have to go back though. This is 2010, right? So this is back to that pioneering word, right? I was asking for something that was new. And so I was happy I had been given this opportunity to try to prove this out. They put up all these caveats. Okay. And I said in my head, okay, get me back to Philly, but like, I'll show you. Like that was it. Like, it is almost probably a positive thing because it was like they threw down the gauntlet and I was like, I'm going to show you you're wrong. Like, I'm going to show you I can do this. I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to get you to de-link potential from location. I don't know how the heck I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out, which will eventually get to my story about like starting my own business. But I think it was almost a good thing in my story, because it gave me a challenge to overcome.
Love it. There's that fighting spirit again. It's amazing. I love
And so,
that. And it's you essentially uncovered the first biggest challenge in the virtual market, which is the bias that exists when your employees go virtual. And you uncovered it at Clorox, which plays forward to the value proposition that you offer your customers today, which is so meaningful. I absolutely love that. And so
yeah,
so
we didn't
yeah.
even have the words for the bias at the time. So what's ironic is that then years later, Clorox brought in the Neuro Leadership Institute to do some unconscious bias training. And in their SEEDS unconscious bias training model, the D in the SEEDS model is distance bias. And
Right.
I was like, oh my goodness, that is the thing I've been feeling all these years, is this unconscious bias where our brains put more value on the people and things that are closer to us than those that are farther away. And so it started to make a ton more sense to me, like, oh, like I'm not being left out of things because out of malice, right? This is like literally an unconscious bias that we have. So I thought that was ironic that we learned about it over time. But the good news is that over time, I was able to change hearts and minds at Clorox, where I did get promoted to director. I did get to work in those roles in those businesses that they said I would not be able to. I did get them in the marketing function to de-link location from potential, but it took years. And the way in which I helped influence that was through starting the first ever virtual workforce employee resource group. So back to being an entrepreneur, I found other people, pockets of people in the organization within different functions who also had been allowed to work fully remotely. And we would gather together and try to share best practices. Like, how are you doing this kind of thing remotely? You know, how are you leading your teams remotely? And so we formalized this employee resource group. And what ended up happening, and this was my big light bulb moment as to why I ended up starting Virtual Work Insider, was that we became the largest and fastest growing employee resource group at the company, where only less than 5% of employees were fully remote. So these were people joining the employee resource group that worked out of headquarters, that worked out of our tech center. And I would be asking them, why are you joining the employee resource group? This was for like the fully remote people and the response I got was, oh, well, we are working with people in other Clorox locations, office sites, for example, and we need to know how to work with them better. And that was my like aha, which was all of the skills that I was learning on how to work fully remotely were applicable to 95% of the workforce, because it was all about helping teams work together better across distance.
I love that. So the company that you formed was Virtual Work Insider. And prior to hopping on this morning, I was thinking to myself, Virtual Work Insider, where did that originate from? And now it all makes sense. Like, tell me about the word insider and what that means to the company's title.
So I was working for Clorox for 8 years, fully remotely. And what I was realizing was that I was kind of unique in having experience working fully remotely at a large legacy company. So a over 100-year-old company, a big manufacturing company, and I had this unique experience out when I was getting pulled into speaking engagements, external speaking engagements, for example, where I wasn't finding other people that were like me. And so as I thought about starting my company, where I wanted to help other organizations work better together across distance, the naming was difficult because I didn't want to use the word remote, first of all, because it's still not about remote. It is about helping teams work across distance with each other, whatever distance means for that organization. So
Mm.
some organizations that mean hybrid or hybrid and remote. So some people coming in and out of an office, some people who are fully remote. It may mean geographically distributed, like helping offices work across the globe or the US with each other. So the virtual word to me was important to kind of represent many of these different organization types. And then the insider word was about, I've been on the inside. I have been in a large corporation. I've had to lead these distributed hybrid and remote teams while being fully remote. I've been on the inside. I've been there. And not just from a kind of consultancy perspective, not just I've read books on this perspective, but I have literally lived this. And so I've gone through the trials and tribulations and successes of trying to figure this out on how to lead these distributed teams.
I love that. So you created this identity at Clorox, which you not only position yourself as the virtual pioneer, but you help them solve one of the biggest challenges around engagement of distance bias and the challenge of people feeling connected. And I wonder, so there was this identity, and you had this identity at Clorox. Fast forward to 2018 when you launch Virtual Work Insider. Your identity is now different, which you go from the pioneer of virtual work at Clorox to founder and CEO of the Virtual Work Insider. And for many people, that identity shift is so scary because now you're no longer the identity that you had at Clorox. You're having to lean into this new title, CEO, founder and CEO of the Virtual Work Insider. And I wonder if you can share what that felt like, and did you have any regrets? Like, I think that many people, starting a new company is not easy. And I just wonder if there was a moment after you launched your company, if you felt like, you know what, this wasn't the right thing, or did you have any regrets as you were kind of, assuming this new identity?
Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right that I felt a huge identity shift. And the biggest identity shift was I was going from Clorox brand marketer to CEO of Virtual Work Insider. And because my identity was built in not just the virtual work aspect, but was built in I had accomplished that brand management role that I had been striving for. I had done it without an MBA. I was at that point a director, also a studio leader of a sales team, a new product innovation team, a marketing team of a portfolio of $250 million worth of business. I was the first fully remote member of the leadership team for $1 billion home care division. That was my identity, really, I was realizing. And then this passion project of mine of like, how do I help teams work better together across distance, which was more getting into that like training, coaching, consulting world. That was like a huge identity shift for me, was to say, okay, now I'm like a small business owner. I couldn't even use the word CEO at first. I was like, that's weird to me. Like a CEO is like my CEO at Clorox who's in charge of a, $6-7 billion business. Like I can't possibly have that same title.
Right.
And that identity shift, it took about a year for me to make the final decision to leave Clorox, because I was going through all of these like messages and beliefs in my head around career progression and like that it's about promotions and like that next step up. And I had been at Clorox for 14 years. So it took me a long time to like get the bravery to say, okay, like I'm going to leave this job that I love, kind of cushy, corporate job, and try to go out on my own. But my husband was super supportive about it and saying like, you can experiment. Like, it sounds like you have an idea here. Let's see if clients are willing to pay for it. Let's see. And I also felt like I had a bit of a safety net with Clorox to possibly even go back if I needed to. And part of the story too is that I actually pitched a job description for Clorox to do what I was thinking about going to do as a business. Because what had happened was that I got to the point where I was running my portfolio of brands, but the employee resource group had grown so much. And I was getting pulled into so many different opportunities like, hey, Sacha, can you come talk to our leadership team about how we can work better together across our different locations? Oh, can you go talk at this conference about what you're doing at Clorox so that we can, teach other organizations how to work across distance? It was becoming such a pull on my time and the thing I really love to do that, again, I was like, all right, I'm going to design a job description and see if maybe I can do this full time instead of my studio leader role. I didn't know what to call it. I called it Director of Corporate Collaboration. And I listed out all the reasons why I thought this needed to be a role. I tried to pose it as like a 6-month test. And it came back to me from HR. My VP was like, okay, let's try this. I'll go with you to HR and see. And they said, we don't think we need a full-time role for this. But if you're gonna go, do your own company, maybe we'd hire you to do some consulting work. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this on my own through Virtual Work Insider.
That's fantastic. I love that. It was almost like that job description was your business plan that you had compiled together, where you're pitching your company to support you to go out and launch your business. And that's fantastic. I love that. So you launched in 2018. Which, by the way, I can only imagine how scary it was pitching companies that they have this idea, or maybe there's this thought about bringing you in to do the work that you did at Clorox. And you obviously, left an incredible mark at Clorox on the work that you've done. But now taking that experience and pitching other companies must be scary as well. They're like, okay, what if they don't like the idea, or what if it doesn't resonate with them? And so I can only imagine some of the insecurities that you must have felt. So when did you realize, what was the moment that you realized after 2018 that this was going to work and this is going to be a company?
Well, what was so interesting is I was really nervous about, how am I going to get my first gig, right?
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize was that how much my network was going to take care of me. So my very first client was one of my long managers at Clorox. So she had left Clorox. She was working for another organization. And she knew of my abilities because I worked for her remotely. And her company was one that was acquiring multiple other companies. And so they had a distributed team across the US that she needed these team members to get to know each other, to collaborate, to communicate across time zones, across groups. So she gave me my first opportunity, which I am forever grateful for, because it gave me an opportunity in a really trusted environment. So back to being nervous, I was nervous because I wanted to do well, but I knew she believed in me. And so she gave me the opportunity to figure out my services and to kind of use her teams as my testing ground to figure out my content. And so really my first couple gigs were, an old boss at Clorox. Clorox itself hired me back to help run a program within the division I had just left. One of my friends from R&D in Clorox, who became a VP at Beam Suntory, hired me to help his entire R&D team work across the multiple office sites. An ex-Clorox colleague that was working at a beer company hired me to come talk at their sales meeting about selling across distance. So it really was my network that I, again, back to like creating that respect about my hard work and my abilities to bring these virtual work best practices to the table, really helped me say like, okay, there's a business case here.
Mm.
And then the pandemic hit.
Okay, so
Which then
let's
exploded things. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Who would have ever thought that it was going to take that to accelerate your company to the next level? I do want to go back though and just make one comment about the power of your network. And you made a choice, obviously. You created that business plan, that was your job description. You had the support from your company to go off on your own. But really you didn't know where your clients were going to come from. And I had a very similar experience when I launched Career Minds, where a former boss of mine, who, by the way, we never got along. Like, he wasn't my favorite boss, and he ended up leaving the company and joining a new company. And he was our first significant client that put us on the map. But you trusted your intuition and you trusted that things were going to work out. You didn't know that those former coworkers who were in these new roles were going to be your clients. And I think, one of the messages for people who are in situations like you, where they're in a company and they have this job description or this business plan that they're looking to go out on their own, you're not going to always know who's going to be supporting you. And you have to trust. You have to trust your trust your network. You have to trust that things are going to work out. The hard work that you've done at your company and the reputation that you've built over time, those people are going to be there for you in some way. And it's so interesting, isn't it? How it's like the universe works, where it's like, when there's not an opportunity presents itself from someone from your network, and you're like, wow, that's interesting. And
It's so true. I feel like that is such a great lesson for, kids who are coming out of college right now, people who are in their careers right now. And it's something that really, it took me to make that risk of going out on my own to like really understand what you're saying. It's about like doing good work, making good choices, being kind to people, respecting people, and putting yourself out there in a vulnerable way. If you do those things, and in my case with a business plan, which is like I was trained to be an innovator at Clorox. I was trained to see where there are unmet needs and where products, services can uniquely fill those unmet needs. So, putting myself in a position where I was like, I see a need, I'm unique in the way that I can help fill that need. All of those things together, it's a weird thing to say, but like the universe will take care of you, which, I don't think I would have believed before, because I'm like, everything must be really controlled and structured.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally feel that. And so you're now in a place where, so I asked the question, when did you feel like the business was a business? And it sounds like it was an evolution. I think it sounds like as your network came alive and you started getting gigs, it evolved to a point where there was like, this is going to happen. This is going to be real. And it's so funny, because I was looking at a recent post on your LinkedIn profile, and I was like, is Sacha wearing a wizard hat? And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go into the caption here. And then it was like, in air quotes, the meeting wizard. And so I did ask, like, you're bringing fun to the work that you're doing, which I think is so cool. And so give me a sense of the meeting wizard. Let's put the meeting wizard hat on. And I have something that I am going to share with you, because, in the spirit of, we're here virtual, right? We're doing this interview. It's all about having fun. And so tell me about, where did the meeting wizard originate from? And then I'm going to add some spice to our call.
Well, I think the whole point is that when, even back to what you were saying about like, when did you know the business was a business? I've been treating this whole thing as an experiment. like from
Right.
day one, right? Like I am learning, I am growing, I am taking what I'm learning from one client engagement into the next client engagement. What I thought what from a business perspective was going to be like a rip and repeat over and over kind of service has not been that at all, because the workforce has changed so dramatically between pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, now into this like hybrid post-pandemic world. So I'm constantly experimenting and constantly trying to figure out in our programs where we are teaching teams how to lead and communicate and build culture in their virtual teams. I'm constantly experimenting on how to make those live virtual sessions engaging and impactful. And one of the several different training modules that we do is around how to lead effective, inclusive, and engaging meetings. And what we try to do in those sessions is not just teach the content, but role model the content. So it's kind of that meta of like you're in a virtual meeting learning about how to run virtual meetings. And so what I tried to do again to create engagement, my team and I at Virtual Work Insider, we were kind of riffing the morning of the session about like how do we really put a finer point to when we're role modeling, more than just saying like, hey guys, I'm role modeling this right now. And that's where the wizard idea came up. We were talking about like, how do you be kind of like pull back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz? And so I was like, I have a hat for that, because I have like a stack of hats for everything. And so I showed up to the training session with my team with this hat on, right? And I'm not afraid of a little cheese. So, it captured everybody's attention. And then what we chose to do was that in the Zoom chat was that every time my program lead who was running the session was role modeling a good virtual meeting best practice, we were using the icon, the wizard icon in the chat with a little label as to like what exactly was being role modeled. And they loved it. They loved it. Like afterwards, the client team was like, "I want a list of all the wizard tips," right? So it made it more fun and interesting, and at my expense, maybe with with the hat on in the session.
I love that. I love that. And so, as we wrap up, I love the fact that you've kind of branded yourself as this meeting wizard. And, I think it's special because for anyone who's watching this and is interested in the work that you're doing, know that it's going to be fun. It's going to be engaging. Okay. So every year for Halloween, I try to dress up as someone that has a wig, and I am obviously have not had hair for many years now. And I was going back and I was thinking about, okay, what can I put on? And it's not a wig, but I have my costume hat from last year, and it's the Mad Hatter.
Oh, okay.
and I'm officially calling myself the Mad Podcaster. Which I have no idea how that's relevant to the meeting wizard, but in the spirit of being vulnerable and having fun on our podcast today, you're the meeting wizard, and I'm calling myself, just for today, the Mad Podcaster.
I mean, your nose, it might pop back up, right?
It could pop back up. And I love this hat, and I'm so happy that I can wear it here today. And so I'm curious, Sacha, as we wrap up, how there obviously will have all the notes in terms of how people can contact you. But if they're listening here today, what's the best way for people to find you and to contact you?
Yes. So the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile, we put out content weekly, which is where you saw my screenshot of me in the wizard hat. Yeah. So if you want more tips and tricks on how to lead distributed, hybrid, and remote teams, so LinkedIn is the best way to get content and follow me there. The other thing I'd love to mention is that within the past year, I launched a cohort-based training program for people managers on how to connect, coach, create inclusive environments with their teams that they're not co-located with. And it's called the Invested Leader Program. So we'll give you a link to that from my website. It's a program that I launched with Udemy. So it's a really scalable program for enterprises who are struggling with helping to support their people managers in this brand new situation where they have to do all of this leadership and coaching and connection with their team members that they're not sitting side by side with for each day.
I love that. We need to check that out ourselves. So I appreciate you sharing that. And great. Well, Sacha, first of all, incredibly grateful that you've carved out your time here this morning to share your clocking out story. And I personally had a lot of fun with it and just appreciate your vulnerability and your share and sharing your story. I know that your kids are proud of you and your husband's proud of you. And, that fighting spirit certainly came alive here today. And so thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Raymond, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and leadership development services. You can learn more about Career Minds at careerminds.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future, and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.